everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to the On the Beat segment brought to you by Ingles. We come to you each Tuesday, this noon hour. Running a step behind today. It's been a busy week at DawgNation. Obviously, you see a lot of stories on the DawgNation.com website, a lot in our DawgNation forum as well. And if you don't have the app, this is definitely the week to get it because this is the week that Georgia football takes off. And look, Georgia's been number 3 all season. We know that. The people that know what they're talking about know, but this is the week that Georgia football hits the mainstream, and I contend this is going to be one of the most glorious weekends in recent Georgia football history. Things are rolling for the Georgia Bulldogs right now. Coming off of that 55-0 win over Arkansas State, I don't think any of us thought that Arkansas State was as much of a threat as Kirby Smart made them out to be. I understand why Kirby did that. He wanted to make sure everybody was focused, and he wanted Georgia to have the type of performance that they had. Georgia came out of that game with a lot of momentum, a lot of confidence, and a lot of players were able to play in that game. I said yesterday in a media segment that I didn't think that there was a script for Georgia to lose this football game other than an outlandish, unprecedented performance by Ian Book. In other words, I say there's no script because I don't think this quarterback can do it. And I don't think he's done it to this point, certainly not to this magnitude. Also, Notre Dame, you got to go back to 2005 since they beat a top 5 team, period. And if you want to go back to find the last time they did it on the road, you're going to have to leave this millennium and go into the 1900s. As much hype as Notre Dame gets, as much attention as the Irish get, and I'm not going to say it's not deserved because there is a lot of tradition there. It is the third winningest program. But the reality is in the modern era, Notre Dame has not been a threat. You got to go back to the 1980s since Notre Dame produced a Heisman Trophy winner. I get it. People are going to tell me the same thing about Georgia. They're going to say, well, Georgia hasn't had one since Herschel Walker, and Georgia didn't win a national title since 1980. Look, if we're talking about a battle of traditions, there's no program out there, maybe Alabama, that comes close to Notre Dame. There's just not. But this isn't the 1940s. It's not about the Four Horsemen. It's not about Frank Gifford. Look, I love the tradition. I like the uniforms. I think it's good. I think it's great that Georgia scheduled this game. Certainly from an aesthetic standpoint, the idea of seeing Georgia in those red uniforms and gray or silver pants against the Irish and those gold helmets in Sanford Stadium, I think that's a picture and a snapshot that we're all looking forward to seeing. And our appetite's been whet a little bit by that meeting 2 years ago. That 20-19 game, it meant so much to Georgia fans. It also meant so much to so many Georgia players. Jake Fromm's first start, Rodrigo Blankenship with the winning kick. A lot of people look back on that and say, that really launched, what should have been a national championship season. I've said it many times. Georgia was the best team in college football in 2017. They grew from that performance. I believe it was integral to Jake Fromm's growth. I think it's part of Jake Fromm's legend, and I make no mistake about it. I think Jake is a legend in the making. When you look at his one-loss record and you look at some of the wins that he's had, obviously they've got to get over the top. They got to finish it. But reeling it back to this particular game, okay, here's the good news. Georgia's going to win this football game. They're going to win it impressively. There's not going to be any heart-stopping moments in the second half. You're not going to be holding your breath. This is a bad matchup for Notre Dame. Notre Dame struggles against the run game. They have a hard time. They rank 120th in the nation right now. Now they've played Louisville. How good is Louisville? I don't think Louisville is that good. And they played New Mexico State. That's why those numbers are alarming. It makes me think maybe Brian Kelly's got a little bit up his sleeve. But look, so does Georgia. In fact, Kirby Smart closed practice today. And that doesn't usually happen on Tuesday. Typically Wednesdays, we might see a practice get closed. And you might ask, well, what does that mean? What's the point of that? Well, Kirby doesn't want us to see his personnel. And that means he doesn't want Notre Dame to see his personnel. My guess is that Tyson Campbell is back. And I think Tyson Campbell is very important to Georgia football. Connor Riley did a story yesterday on what Kirby said about Tyson Campbell. I took note of Tyson Campbell's performance in the first half against Arkansas State and even against Murray State and Vandy. Number 3 on defense has really been bringing the hat. Last year, run support. I think Tyson injured his shoulder in that Missouri game. You may remember on that fumble recovery for a touchdown. He came out of the game with a shoulder subluxation. He got sick, nauseated. That's his body going into shock. Eric Stokes came in and replaced him. And I didn't think that Tyson Campbell was the same guy the rest of the year, because once you lose a shoulder like that, I think it affects you mentally. The Tyson Campbell that I've seen this year, though, has been playing outstanding. He looks like the 5-star impact player that maybe we all thought he would be last year. And J.R. Reed told us yesterday he thinks that Tyson has his confidence back. And talking with Tyson last year after the SEC title game, he talked a lot about having to get there mentally. And I think that's happened. So Tyson came out of the Arkansas State game. He was kind of running up and down the sideline. In the press box, they reported right foot injury. Didn't know if he'd be back for the second half. He wasn't. He wasn't at practice yesterday. I think Tyson Campbell's going to be a go in this game. Other injuries that of note that I think are important, certainly the receiver position, Demetrius Robertson. We were just about to go inside yesterday, and Demetrius Robertson comes running out. He had tape on the back of his leg that would indicate a hamstring or some sort of pull. Kirby said it was a lower body extremity, which we tried to break that down. And what is a lower body? Is that a big toe? Is that an ankle? I don't know what a lower body extremity covers, but I think it was a hamstring or a pull. I think D-Rob is expected to be back. I think that's pretty important for Georgia. Tommy Bush, I don't think will be back. I don't think that's very important for Georgia. I don't really see him in the rotation. But the Tyson Campbell injury to me is probably the most important one. I don't think that Georgia is necessarily susceptible in the secondary without Tyson Campbell, but they're not at their best. And I think that he is head and shoulders above the number 3. DJ Daniel, I know that he's done some good things in practice. I haven't seen it personally yet, so I can't attest to it. Tyreek Stevenson, Tyreek the Freak, a guy that Dan Lanning said is a big-time playmaker. We haven't seen that yet. The Tyler Simmons injury is interesting. He had the shoulder last year and played in a brace. He'll play in a brace again. I just don't know how effective Tyler Simmons will be now as a receiver. We know he'll block. We know he's a soldier, and we know he's a great leader. So that should cover the injury front. But all this adds up to, going back to my original statement, this is going to be a great weekend of football for Georgia fans at Sanford Stadium. One thing that I think has put a damper on Georgia football at Sanford Stadium, the last 2 years at least, has been the weather. I mean, last year it was absolutely insufferable at the start of the year, and by the time Georgia came back from being away the whole month of October, it seemed, it was cold. It was cold for the Auburn game. They said, well, Mike, you just got to understand, that's just how the Auburn game is. Well, maybe that's how it was, because moving forward, obviously, they're going to have that Auburn game earlier in the season. And I think after, we'll see what happens with Georgia, Florida. I think ultimately that might end up back in Athens anyway. And that would be a good weather game as well in the time of year, certainly a huge recruiting weekend. The weather for Saturday, depending on who you trust, depending on which service you look at, could be anywhere from a high in the low 90s to a high in the mid to high 80s. Now, by 8 o'clock, it's going to cool off a little bit. And while that's going to be very enjoyable for fans, so it's going to be so much better than this 100-degree heat index. So what do you got here? So far we got good weather. You got a game against a Notre Dame team that's going to draw a lot of national attention. I think Brandon Adams wrote last night that this is a game that could launch the Heisman Trophy campaign for Jake Fromm and DeAndre Swift in earnest. I think that's a great point. I think what you do in a game like this with College Game Day present, with a national CBS television audience at night, I think this is the sort of game that resonates. I don't think this is a game that wins the Heisman Trophy for you, but I think it's a game that can put you on the map. And I certainly think we're going to see more from DeAndre Swift than we've seen. So far, we really haven't had to see Swift play a 4-quarter game. Now, part of that is the depth, and it'll be interesting to me to see when they substitute in a game like this. Obviously, if they have it well in hand, you may not see DeAndre in the fourth quarter, but I think you're going to see more Swift. I think Swift is going to do big things. I think Jake Fromm is going to do big things. I think Notre Dame is going to try and load up like everyone else and stop the run, and that's going to create opportunities for Jake to go downfield, and that's where George Pickens and Dominic Blaylock and Lawrence Cager and Eli Wolf, and what do those 4 players have in common? They're the top 4 receivers on the team. Well, throw Swift in there, but receiver-wise, receiver tight ends, those are the top 4 pass catchers yardage-wise so far this season. What else do they have in common? None of them were on the team last year. And does that not say a lot about the job that Kirby Smart and his staff did recruiting? I've heard people make the argument when we talk about whether or not a game should be a home and home or how much people, it's just 2 or 3 players. What difference does that make? Well, you tell me. What difference does George Pickens, Dominic Blaylock, Eli Wolf, and Lawrence Cager make right now when we look at Georgia and how they finished that last game with 4 receivers on the sidelines? You better believe every one of those guys counts. I think that Kirby's and his staff's job recruiting to this 2019 class has been absolutely pivotal and integral to Georgia being the national championship contender that they are. And I'm not a guy that goes over the top with recruiting. In fact, I'm very skeptical typically when it comes to freshman receivers or freshman defenders in the front 7 contributing. Typically, young receivers don't come in with the mentality to block and do the blue-collar things that Kirby Smart insists on. And typically, young players in the front 7 aren't physically developed enough to win those man battles in the trenches. But in George Pickens, you've got a guy who is plenty aggressive enough. In Dominic Blaylock, you've got a guy who's been so well coached and is so assignment sound, it's crazy. And in Nolan Smith, you've got a guy that I compare to a raptor with his closing speed. When I watch Nolan chase these people down, he moves faster than my brain is ready to see. It reminds me of the first time I covered the Indy 500, actually the first and only time for that matter, in the 90s. One of the experienced journalists told me, stand on the press row here, look at the track, and try and follow the cars when they drive by. The first time around, I couldn't do it. My brain couldn't comprehend 235 miles per hour, 100 yards in front of me. Well, when you watch football and guys have that, what do you call the button you hit in the video game that makes them go faster? The burst button or whatever. Sometimes you see offensive players with that. You see George Pickens with that when the ball's in the air. You see it with Nolan Smith. It's like somebody's tapping the button twice and he's accelerating faster than everybody else on the video game. And that's what's going to make him such a special player. And it also tells you a lot about Azeez Ojulari. I'll tell you, I'm excited because Azeez Ojulari is going to talk tonight. Rodrigo is going to talk. Rodrigo Blankenship, obviously the Notre Dame game was big for him. Connor's going to be with me. He's going to do a story on Rodrigo tonight. I'm going to talk to Azeez Ojulari. I'm fascinated by this guy. He's starting ahead of Nolan Smith for a reason. He's been coached up so well by Dan Lanning, and he's worked so hard. Now, we all know about Zamir White and how excited everybody is to see what Zamir's come back from. Well, Azeez came back from a knee too. Now, he didn't do it in the spotlight like Zamir, and he wasn't a 5-star like Zamir, so he hasn't really gotten the fanfare, and I think that's probably made it harder. Where Zamir has kind of had DawgNation pulling him through this. Georgia fans, Zamir puts those workout tapes out there. He did it for a reason. Fans encourage him. It helps him put pressure on himself, and that's been a remarkable comeback, and certainly it's been one of the most wonderful stories of the season for Georgia football. But I think Azeez Ojulari coming back from a knee injury is also a really special story, and what he's doing on defense is incredible. And I'm excited to watch Azeez Ojulari. I'll be excited to talk to him tonight. He's become one of my favorite players to interview. He's a very deep, insightful, and thoughtful young man, and he's also a heck of a football player. So a couple of guys we're going to talk to tonight, a couple of stories within the stories. I'm telling you, this season, it's just got that feel. And I've covered a couple of undefeated teams in my career. I covered 93 Auburn, and I covered 1998 Tennessee. And Michigan State didn't go undefeated in 2013, but they came pretty darn close. They won the Rose Bowl and really should have beat Notre Dame if not for 5 pass interference calls that anybody who was at that stadium realizes wouldn't have happened in any other stadium except for Notre Dame Stadium in South Bend. I've been around the teams that have that special, that extra, that intangible that you can't really measure and you can't really put your finger on, but you just feel it. And there's a certain, a team has a certain glow about it. I think the word is synergy. When the sum is greater than all the parts, you achieve synergy. And, it's kind of a philosophical principle, I suppose, when it comes to football. But I like what George has been through. I like the growth that happened in the offseason. I think that the attrition has helped. Now, this is short term. I'm not going to tell you that 2 or 3 years from now you're not going to miss Brenton Cox or Justin Fields. You certainly miss J.J. Holloman. But what that attrition has done, different guys leaving have helped in different ways. But essentially the team's pulled together. And when you talk with the Georgia players about what's different this year than last year, they tell you that the brotherhood and the togetherness. And I think that says a lot for Kirby Smart and his staff. I think it says a lot for Jake Fromm, for J.R. Reed, for Monty Rice, for Andrew Thomas, these internal team leaders. These guys make a difference. It's why a guy like George Pickens, Kirby will be the first to tell you, George is still making some mistakes out there. There's still some busts. There's still some things that they want to see George do better. But because you have that team leadership, because you have that structure, a guy like George Pickens stays between the lines and develops within the program. This is not a short feat for a freshman receiver to do what George Pickens has done or what Dominic Blaylock has done. There's a reason that Jeff Sentell was telling all of you how important these two receivers were. Now seeing is believing. And again, it's absolutely integral to Georgia's success. I want to take a look inside a couple numbers here. Georgia rushing offense, 8th in the nation, Notre Dame 45th. Notre Dame probably, they will be without their top rusher, Jafar Armstrong. He was injured in the opener. He's not going to be back. Jameer Smith, a guy had a toe injury, I guess last week. He's kind of questionable for this game. So you wonder a little bit about the Irish playmakers in the backfield. They moved a guy that's been a quarterback, a DB, and a receiver. They moved him to running back. He's a big play guy, but I just don't think that Notre Dame has the speed that they're going to outflank Georgia for anything. I just don't see it. And if they can't pound the ball and run the ball effectively, folks, that means a lot of third down situations, okay? And when you get into third and long against Kirby Smart's defense, he can do some things. And Georgia's got some things that they have not done yet. David Marshall told us as much the other day. We haven't come close to seeing the havoc that Georgia can reap with these different fronts and different pressure packages. I think you're going to have an opportunity to see some of those. And I think Notre Dame quarterback Ian Book, who's really the Irish's only shot, but he's going to see a lot of looks and pressures that he hasn't seen before, as is the Notre Dame line. So I expect Notre Dame to hit some big plays, a couple, probably two or three plays over 30 yards. I think they'll have some explosive plays, but I also think the Georgia havoc rate will be high, and I think you're going to see some turnovers, and I think you're going to see some sacks. In fact, if you go to the DawgNation forum, you can weigh in on this. I started a thread asking kind of for an over-under on Ian Book and what we expected. So passing touchdowns, 1. I think Ian Book will have 1 passing touchdown. You think more or do you think less? Interceptions, I think Ian Book will throw 2 interceptions at Sanford Stadium. Is that too high or is that too low? The over-under game. Yards passing, 250, albeit probably 150 of them will come in garbage time after Georgia's up by 2 or 3 touchdowns. Yards rushing, he's a dual threat. I'm going to give him 15. The last guy that Georgia played that was a dual threat 2 years ago, Brandon Wimbush, had 1 in 16 attempts. So Kirby knows how to contain quarterbacks. And I know people are going to throw Jalen Hurts up in your face, but guess what? Brenton Cox is gone, and they got guys that can contain now. Rushing touchdowns, I think that Ian Book, I think he'll score 1 rushing touchdown. I'll give him that. And I think the over-under on sacks is 2.5. And I would lean towards the over on that, even though he's elusive and he's a senior and he's smart and he knows how to get rid of the ball. There's going to be guys that are going to come in and hit Ian Book, before it comes. I want to get back to the Heisman race again. I've had a Heisman vote for a long, long time, and certainly at this stage of the season, I'm nowhere close or ready to tell you this is the guy that I think will win the Heisman. Not this year, at least. But some of the top candidates right now, in my mind, I think what Jalen Hurts is doing at Oklahoma is very impressive. I don't expect the Big 12 to get any tougher between now and the end of the season. Maybe Texas. I think Tom Herman's done a great job there. Certainly Georgia fans have seen that up close and personal. Kirby's now seen it twice. Herman was the offensive coordinator when Ohio State beat Kirby's defense in a national championship game in Alabama. Herman is for real. Texas really is on the way back. I just don't think they're quite ready for Oklahoma this year. So I put Jalen Hurts up there. Cover your ears. You're not going to like this one. I think Justin Fields is a legitimate Heisman candidate. I'd be surprised if he was not in New York as one of the finalists. I don't think Ohio State is going to lose a football game until they get to the college football playoff. Okay, Oklahoma may lose 1 to Texas, but they'll win it back in the Big 12 championship if that's the case. So Hurts, Fields, Joe Burrow at LSU is now the leading passer in the SEC. He's got more passing yardage than anyone, even Tua. Tua's slightly behind him. Tua's on this list, certainly Tua Tagovailoa. He is certainly one of these Heisman Trophy candidates with Joe Burrow. Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin. Part of the reason why this Saturday is such a magnificent football Saturday, if you're a Georgia fan or any other college football fan, is because we've got a lot of really good football games at noon to watch. I am going to be in front of my television at noon watching college football and flipping between flip. I want to watch LSU at Vanderbilt. Not that I think Vanderbilt's got any chance. I just want to see how Vanderbilt holds up at home against LSU compared to how Georgia did. Now, I don't know how much really can be gained from that, but there's a curiosity factor for me there. Tennessee at Florida. I've got the Gator. I think this is an upset watch game. I really do. As bad and as ugly as Tennessee has looked, the last time they went down to Gainesville, they should have won that game. A lot of the same casting characters. Last year, Tennessee turned the ball over 5 or 6 times. They were never in contention. They beat themselves, before the game even got started. This time, Tennessee playing for redemption. And Florida, I think, has got to be a little shaky right now. They barely escaped Kentucky. They were very fortunate to win at Kentucky. And now they've got quarterback situation, right? Felipe Franks, he's out. He's gone. So now we've seen the Kentucky quarterback out for the season. We've seen the South Carolina quarterback out for the season. Now the Florida quarterback's out for the season. And some people will say, well, Mike, these other guys are better. Okay, well, if they're all better, then these coaches shouldn't be getting paid millions because they didn't think they were. There's a reason these guys were backups, okay? And maybe week one, the whole fool me once thing, but once teams get dialed in and get a scouting report on these guys, let's see what happens moving down the line. I know the South Carolina quarterback's supposed to be all that. Let's see what happens at Missouri at 4 p.m. That's another game I'm going to be scoreboard watching. South Carolina, Missouri. Could one of these teams be lurking? I still think Missouri is the second best team in the East Division. I know they lost at Wyoming, but it was early. I think Kelly Bryant's going to get better, and I think Derek Dooley is doing a good job there. I have no problem saying that. I think he did a great job with Drew Lock. That's why Drew Lock came back for his senior year, and I think he's going to do a good job with Kelly Bryant, and I think Missouri is going to be Georgia's biggest threat in the East. South Carolina, feisty, Muschamp, didn't do a very good job coaching against Alabama. South Carolina needs this football game, and Missouri needs this football game. This is an interesting game. Kentucky, Mississippi State, curiosity. They're both mediocre teams, probably 6-7 wins tops for either one of them. San Jose State at Arkansas at 7:30. We don't care. Arkansas needs to win. Don't get embarrassed, Arkansas. Whatever you think of their coach, they're nowhere close to being back. Cal's at Ole Miss in another noon game, by the way. Ole Miss, a chance for the SEC to get a nice out-of-conference win. This stuff matters in the metrics in the long run. Now with the college football playoff, more reason than ever now to root for other teams in the league. I know we had this conversation with Florida and Miami at the start of the year. A lot of people didn't agree with me, but I think in the long run that was a good win for the SEC, especially when you consider that South Carolina dropped one against North Carolina, and that was kind of a feather in the ACC's cap before Syracuse blew up against Maryland, and they had another embarrassing loss last week. It slips my mind at the moment. I think if we're trying to remember ACC embarrassing losses, we could probably sit here forever and talk about that. So glorious football weekend ahead. I contend it will be the greatest Georgia football weekend for fans, maybe of the millennium in Sanford Stadium. Let me specify that, because the Rose Bowl is a remarkable feat. I was not there for that game, but I've been to the Rose Bowl a few times for big games. It is one of the most impressive venues for any sport. I'd put it there with the Masters. I'd put it there with Bristol Motor Speedway back when they were selling that place out. When I think about pageantry and Wrigley Field, and to have Sanford Stadium with an attendance record and Notre Dame in a game that Georgia will control, with a national television audience, with College Game Day, and weather that you can bear in the low 80s and high 70s by halftime. What a glorious night at Sanford Stadium. What a special evening lies ahead for those fans. There's a reason that this was the top ticket in college football. And if you've got a ticket, congratulations. It's the golden ticket. It's kind of like the whole Willy Wonka thing, right? You're going to be able to tell your family, your friends, your grandchildren that you were there the night that Georgia routed Notre Dame. And people are going to point back to this game and say, that's the game that launched Georgia's 2019 championship season. That's how the script is written. Right? Me as a sports writer, you sit back, you root for stories like this. People say, who do you root for? Do you root for team? We root for good stories. That's why it's been great covering Georgia. There's so many good stories within this football team. The Kirby Smart coming home to coach it is, okay, that's great. And Kirby winning a title, that's kind of the next step for him. But the Dan Lanning story, what this guy's been through to become a coordinator, right? The James Coley story, his trials and tribulations, the hard work he's put in to be able to recruit South Florida, the individuals on this team, the Great Wall. How many times have you actually heard an offensive line this celebrated? I can't remember the last time, and maybe the Washington Redskins and the Hogs. It's been a long time since you've had an offensive line with the celebrity that these Georgia linemen have. And I'll give these kids credit. They hold it up. They show up for interviews, and they're transparent. They give good interviews. They're all in. They're entertaining. There's not a guy on that offensive line that I don't enjoy talking to. And hopefully you've had a chance to see all that on DawgNation. We do a lot of videos and a lot of stories, and this is why. Because we want you to know the team. We want you to know what we know, and that's why we do volume, and that's why we do videos, and that's why we write headlines, because there are a lot of stories on the Jake Fromm story, right? We all know the Jake story. You wondered how it could get even better, and then you found out about his grandma's cookies. Or as it turned out, his grandma's fruit pizza. I guess that's what it is. And if you haven't read that story by Centel, you got to find it. Just Google Centel Fromm fruit pizza. I think it's still got viral potential. I expect to see this fruit pizza pop up at tailgates, and who knows, maybe even game day will latch on to that and get Grandma Fromm on there. That would be a neat segment if they could find Jake's grandma and dig in on that fruit pizza that these offensive linemen enjoy so much when Jake is properly protected. I could go on and on. In fact, I have gone on and on. Let me take a look and see if you all have some questions for me now. My producer, Michael Carvel, loves this segment of the show. Appreciate Michael's support and his outstanding production here in the DawgNation studio. So if I go to my Facebook here, let's just check this out, see what questions you have for me or what thoughts or ideas you have about the Georgia football game, because there's a lot to be said and there's a lot to be thinking about. Do I think Vandy players have quit on Derek Mason? No. And I don't have intimate knowledge of that. Ro Hawkins, that's a good question because I was disappointed. I'm sure as you were, maybe surprised to see Vanderbilt lose at Purdue the next week. I just think there's only so much gas in the Vandy tank, and I think they lost a lot of players. There's some questions about depth, and there's some question at quarterback. And when you don't answer your quarterback questions effectively, I think it can really be the end of your team quickly. And I also think two quarterback systems are not ideal. And if you don't believe me, all you got to do is reflect on last year's Sugar Bowl. Is it going to be a blackout or not? Matt Goodwin says, no, I don't think it is. And listen, it's not my place to decide it, all right? But if Georgia wanted a blackout, they would be retweeting and encouraging the fan sentiment for a blackout. And when I say Georgia, I'm talking about the head ball coach. I'm talking about Kirby Smart, okay? There's a reason Kirby doesn't want a blackout. Kirby has been on the other side of a blackout. It wasn't too long ago. He knows it does more for the opponent than it does for the home team. And this is not the game you want to black out anyway. I mean, my goodness, when we're talking about historic moments and when we're talking about legends and legacies and players launching Heisman campaigns, you want to see that signature red. I mean, that's Georgia football. When you see red and those gray or silver pants, I mean, that's what you think of about Georgia. It'd be like if they broke out some funky helmet for this game. You don't want to see that against Notre Dame. You want to see the brand on display. And the brand for Georgia is those home reds. And it's a sea of red at Georgia. It's not a sea of black, okay? That's gimmicky to me. Now, I'm not saying it should never happen, and I understand that people have an affinity for those uniforms. Save that for another day. Save that for, I don't know, a Halloween night game or something. Or play, bring them down there to Jacksonville. Before, once it turns into home and home, you need to get back to the red. But play it in one of those neutral site games. Don't play it in a game, where they're playing. How about Georgia Tech? Maybe that would add some interest to the Georgia Tech game because really nobody else cares about Georgia Tech outside the state. But don't do it for Notre Dame. I mean, think about this. If or when Georgia wins the national championship this season, and you go to the bookstore, and there's a picture on the cover of Georgia beating, do you want to see him in black jerseys? No, you want that moment, that oil painting to be in red. That's my opinion. You asked a simple question. I took it there. Maybe I shouldn't have said all that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's how I feel about it. I feel like Georgia's tradition is such that I wouldn't mess with the red jerseys for a game of this magnitude and a game of this historic importance. I wouldn't want to wear black jerseys against Alabama. Like I said, wear them for Georgia Tech. Maybe that adds some spice to that game. Nothing else seems to. Georgia Tech's just so awful. J.R. Reed, we asked him about it yesterday. He said he wouldn't care if they wore purple jerseys. Yeah, Fred Sanford, all the other teams wears the black except for this. So do they? I guess I didn't realize that every other team. I haven't seen every other team wear black a lot. Let's see here. Adrian Carver. Dang, Mike, slick diss on the tech. Listen, Adrian, here's the thing. I'm not trying to diss. This is how it is. They just lost to the Citadel. Look, Jeff Collins he's trying to do some good. It's going to take time. I mean, you got personnel right there that is not suited for what they're doing. I don't want to waste another second talking about Georgia Tech on this program. Anyway, I wanted to answer your question, but I'm not going to waste another second because they don't matter. Ro Hawkins, did Matt Landers look not interested in the game last Saturday? I wouldn't say that, but the question I have about Matt Landers, and I don't know if you were watching the show earlier when I was talking about Nolan Smith and the button that you hit. Somebody tell me what that button is. When you hit the button and the guy goes faster, right? I don't see Matt Landers with that button. I don't see Matt Landers with that button, that speed up button when the ball is in the air. You like the fruit cookie, Philip Jordan Wells. I think that's a story. I'm jealous of Centel for getting the recipe, right? I think it's pretty fascinating. Cody Taylor, Landers' hands need to improve. Probably. I think Matt needs to realize that he's got some work to do, that he needs to be a blue-collar guy that's reliable, dependable. He's a talented guy, and I think Georgia needs Matt Landers. That don't write him just because George Pickens has become the eighth wonder of the world with these sensational catches every game, and Dominic Blaylock is every coach's dream. Don't let that take your appreciation away for some of these other guys that have worked hard on his football team, like Matt Landers, who soldiered through some tough times with Kirby and earned his place this year. Demetrius Robertson, who's overcome an injury and a transfer, is still a dynamic outside threat. Charlie Warner is still an important receiver and a big piece of this team, even if Eli is the guy running a 4.5 40 at 239. So don't let the stars diminish these other players, because part of what makes Georgia special is that these guys all root for each other. They're all on the same page. This year's team is. Last year, I don't think so. I mean, I just don't believe that things were hunky-dory last year in the quarterback, not the way they needed to be. And I'm not saying it's anybody's fault. I just think if you put two alpha males in a room, you're going to have problems. There's going to be some gnashing of the teeth. There's going to be some overlap. And Fields didn't come here to be a backup, and Jake Fromm came here to win games and not worry about what the other guy was thinking. I don't think you have those issues this season. I don't think we're seeing that. And I think that's part of why Georgia has that synergy, and I think that's also why Georgia's going to win the SEC this season, as long as they keep number 11 upright. As long as Jake Fromm is healthy, I don't think Georgia football is going to lose a game this year. That's how I feel right now today on September 17th. Chad Daniel, we got this thing started here on the uniforms. John Welsh, Matt needs to use two hands. John, you saw the same thing I did on that throw that Fromm had, and Matt stuck out one hand. That's a catch George Pickens made the week before. I mean, it is what it is. He's got the speed up button, and Matt didn't. Fromm was not happy with that. You could tell by his reaction. I mean, Jake didn't throw his helmet or do anything crazy, but he before he could catch himself, you could see that he was disappointed Matt didn't catch that deep ball. I'm sure that Kirby was disappointed too. Joel Torres, I wouldn't say last year was divided. I just don't think it was as unified as this year's team, if that makes sense to you. I think everybody had the same mission statement. I don't necessarily, but the quarterback situation was pressure, and it was what it was. And nobody did it again. Nobody did anything wrong here. All right, but this is sometimes what happens. It happened at Clemson. I mean, there's a reason Kelly Bryant left that program, and Trevor Lawrence. And if Trevor doesn't get it going this year, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, 5 touchdown passes and 5 interceptions, has not looked like he did in January. Now, I don't know if he'll ever look like that again. That was an unbelievable performance. I still think Trevor Lawrence is an amazing quarterback. I'm glad he was selected as the freshman of the year. It's one of my things I do with the freshman All-American team is I select the freshman All-American team and have a big role in who gets player of the year. I'm glad he was the choice. It's just as I'm glad that Cade Mays was on that team. I had somebody tell me started this year, hey, how was Cade Mays a freshman All-American if he didn't even start? I said, look, man, watch this guy play. And look what Cade is doing this year. I wrote a headline a few weeks ago saying Cade Mays might be the MVP on the offensive line. Not the best offensive lineman, because Andrew Thomas will probably be a top 5 pick and is one of the top 2 or 3 candidates to win the Outland Trophy, but the most valuable, because in the first 2 games of the year, Cade played 3 different line positions. And we saw last week, Big Ben Cleveland made his first start at 2019. Cade kicked out there to right tackle, and Georgia didn't miss a beat. Now, this week's going to be interesting. Isaiah Wilson was out at practice yesterday, didn't look 100%, looked like he had the burst, didn't look like he had the conditioning. I think we'll see Isaiah Wilson on Saturday in a limited capacity. I think he'll be available. I don't know if he's going to be your best option yet, though, because I don't know where he's at in terms of being able to sustain on a drive. Could he be out there for a 13-play drive and be just as effective on play number 13 as number 1? I don't know that yet. The luxury is he doesn't need to be, because Georgia's got unbelievable depth there. Mike, you just asked the question, Chris Branham. A good question. I hope I answered that for you. What else do we got here? Armand Rashad, will Notori be an impact on the D-line? Okay, so the D-line, and Brian Kelly shed some insight on this earlier this week. I've been listening to all the Notre Dame press conferences, teleconferences, and Brian Kelly is a really good listen. He's a great coach. Brian Kelly is a great football coach. I want to be clear on that. This guy's won a lot of football games, and he's won everywhere he's been at. He was a dominator up there in Michigan at Grand Valley State. The guy can coach, okay? Make no mistake about it. He's a great coacher, and he's a great coach. He develops personnel. He's a great recruiter. But he doesn't have the horses to win this football game, and Brian Kelly knows that. Now, when Brian was talking about the Georgia defensive line, there wasn't one name that he shouted out, but he said they've got 8 guys. They go 8 deep without any drop-off, and that's not counting Julian Rochester, who may make his debut this week. I thought Julian looked really good in practice. Remember, Julian had off-season ACL surgery. Don't be surprised if number 5's out there. I'm not saying he will be, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think he's getting closer. But Kelly's point was, in the Georgia's 3 and 4 down front, Kirby can rotate. And when you're able to keep guys fresh and you're able to keep throwing 300 and 285 pounds at these teams up front, that has a wear-down effect. Typically, defenses get worn down. Georgia football not going to get worn down in their front 7. There's a lot of quality depth there, not just the D-line, but at linebacker as well. We talked about that at the start of the show when I was telling you about the Raptor, Nolan Smith, as well as Azeez Ojulari, who we're going to talk to today. And then inside, we've seen Quay Walker step up a little bit behind Monty Rice and Tay Crowder. And we're still waiting on Nakobe Dean to look 100%. He had that fast button going. Somebody tell me what the fast button, what button am I looking for? The burst button? I don't know, something to that effect. Daniel Aldrich, Fields cost you the game against Alabama. That's probably a little strong, Daniel. I would say that Rodrigo Blankenship's missed field goal probably was costly, and I would also say that DeAndre Walker getting injured. Thank you, Joel Torres. Thank you. The turbo button. Nolan Smith has the turbo button. George Pickens has the turbo button. I'm going to say turbo 50 times more. I'm not going to say that again. Nitro. Nitro works too. Thank you, Chris Branham. Nitro, turbo. These are words that I need to ingrain in my mind as I look for adjectives to describe players like Nolan Smith and George Pickens, because I can't come up with enough of them. These players are dynamic, and it's exciting to cover a team as a writer, right? It's kind of like, I kind of look at it like this, a painter. You tell a painter maybe someone specializes in painting sunsets, right? Probably cool if he lives closer to the ocean or the mountains. Because in the oceans and the mountains, there's great things to paint. There's all these colors on the horizon. There's all these trees. There's all this foliage if you're painting mountains versus painting the desert, okay? When you cover a bad football team, it's like painting the desert. There's nothing fun or good to write about. There's misery. There's heat. There's loss. There's career death. But when you cover a program like Georgia, especially right now, you're painting sunsets when you write about this team. You're painting mountains. You're painting foliage. You're finding flowers that are blooming unbelievably. You're under the sea in a coral reef with player after player after player to write about. And you need to find adjectives like turbo and nitro to describe guys like the Georgia Bulldogs have. That's just the way it is. It's fine. This is one of this is times people say, "Oh, you must be so lucky to be a sports writer." You go, "Well, I work long hours. I got to drive here. Nobody's getting rich." Look, this year, yes, be jealous of me because I'm covering a program and having a season as a beat writer that is very memorable. I've covered a lot of teams over the last 26 years, and I can tell you I am having more fun now covering Georgia than I've had covering any football team in my career. That's how dynamic these players are. That's how friendly Athens, Georgia is. And that's how cool of a place Sanford Stadium is. And that's why I always contend, I don't know why you'd ever want to take a game away from Sanford Stadium that you didn't absolutely have to. Because that place is magical, folks. I'm telling you, that is a cool stadium. When I can look out and see people walk into the stadium and see the bookstore across the street and an open end zone like that, and there's still 92,000 in there, and the people stand up and they sing Sweet Caroline and all the different fight songs and the Red Coat Band. I mean, that is college football. That's what I signed up for, right? Getting here late, Robert Barnes said, "You told like it is on Fine." But I try to tell like it is every time. I had someone, Georgia, say, "Thanks for supporting the program." Look, I'm just telling how it is. If Georgia stunk, I would say that. Just beware. If Georgia doesn't do something good, I'm going to say that. Right. And I have said it in the past and people have gotten ticked off. I thought the game plan for LSU was lousy. I thought Jim Chaney did a bad job. And I said that. I said Jake Fromm was struggling on 3rd and longs the first half of last season. People didn't want to hear it, but it was the truth. So now when I'm telling you everything's great, it's because I believe it. It's not because I'm on the bandwagon, right? It's not because I'm a big Georgia fan, although it's hard not to have a respect and appreciation for this place. It's because that's how I see it. And that's why it's fun for me right now to call it like I see it and see these sunsets and see these mountains that I'm seeing with Georgia football. Brian Roach wants to know, are they going to have, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Brian, are they going to have the new red lights on Saturday? I think so. They kind of gave us a sneak peek. That's going to be really cool. And then here's the thing that Georgia fans, it is upsetting. I almost used a different word there. It is really upsetting the Alabama fans that Georgia is going to get to use their LED lights before Alabama is going to get to do it in Tuscaloosa. I know that seems trivial, but it's like that, right? It's the SEC. The competition is so real, and Georgia's going to get to do it first. It's going to look sweet. I think that. I don't know that. I haven't talked to McGarity. I haven't had an engineer tell me it's ready to go, but I think that's what's going to happen. Lonnie Floyd, Mike, do you think this is the year? Because people are giving me junk because I keep saying it is, Lonnie. Listen. Part of what's cool about college football is that you stand by your team and you talk about them regardless of how they're going to do. The Notre Dame people that are firing back at me on Twitter because I think there's no way that Notre Dame can win. I respect that. That's their program. They love it. They're supposed to fire back. They're supposed to love the Irish. They're supposed to dream and have fantasies that maybe Notre Dame can have this mythical, magical performances. That's what they're supposed to do. That's what's cool about college football, right? We haven't gone the fantasy football, the rotisserie football way yet, where we're rooting for different players on different teams. I mean, I'll admit, come Sundays, I'm kind of a wreck. I used to have a favorite team. Now my favorite team is the one that I drafted for the NFL. That's not very realistic. Probably wouldn't qualify me as a very good fan. But in college football, it's all about the program. It's all about the image. It's about the stadium. It's about the LED lights. It's about the band. It's about the legends. It's about the fact that Herschel Walker will be Herschel Walker, right? And you got to think Georgia's doing something for Herschel Walker right now. I don't know what it is, but I'd be shocked if there wasn't some reference or some gesture from Georgia for Herschel Walker. I've said it before. This man should have his own award. I am leading the march for that. The Herschel Walker Award should go to the best running back in college football. I will chair that award if I get the opportunity. I will absolutely chair that award because that is legitimate. And Herschel Walker is an amazing person. In addition to being a great football player from yesteryear, I like what Herschel Walker is all about. I heard him speak at SEC Media Days. He's dynamic. I think he's a good follow on Twitter. And I've got a lot of respect for that man. And it's long overdue, just as it was for Vince Dooley, long overdue for Georgia to recognize him in a very major way. And I think there is something in the works right now. I don't know what, but I'm going to throw it out there. If they're not going to let me in on the secret, I'm going to let you know they're working on something. They're working on something. I don't know what it is. Rebecca H. Ford, I hope you're right, but up until now, they haven't played a team worthy of their talent. That's fair. I would absolutely agree with that. And I just answered a question that wasn't even on my thread. It was on Connor's story. So Rebecca Floyd, if you're watching, you got a bonus answer there. This is true. I'm not this strong and high on Georgia because of what they did against Vanderbilt or because of what they did against Murray State or because of what happened against Arkansas State. I'm high and strong on Georgia because I saw something special yesterday. When I was out at practice, those drills, right? Remember what I was telling you earlier about how, the first time I go to the Indy 500 and the cars drive by and my eyes don't follow them because I'm not used to seeing the cars move that fast. That was kind of what it was like watching the opening of practice yesterday. Suddenly, these warm-ups weren't just warm-ups. These guys were on fire. These kids were moving, okay? There is a different level of energy in those practices right now. No doubt about it. These players have been waiting. And J.R. Reed, and I love J.R., he's a really intelligent kid. He could be in the NFL right now if he wanted to be. He came back to win a championship. So tip of the cap to J.R. Reed and what he's all about. He says nameless and faceless opponents, and I get the mantra, and I think that's a good way to keep the young guys calm. But look, these guys understand this is prime time. This is prime time, and everybody's going to be watching Georgia football to see if the Bulldogs are for real. And they're going to find out that they are. And it's going to be a glorious Saturday, as I said at the start of this thing. You're going to enjoy this. Daniel Aldrich, turbocharge. Scott Murphy, please with some laughter. Appreciate that. Anybody have any more questions? James Cook, 15 touches. Now let's talk about him, Marshall Fleming. Let's talk about James Cook. I'm not the coach of the program. You know that. I'm just an analyst. But if I'm Georgia, I'm moving James Cook to the slot this week. Because Kenny McIntosh. Now, I'd heard some people, and I know this happened, because I was in Florida talking to Kenny and his family. Let me tell you, that family, you want to talk about chip on they didn't like what happened at Alabama. Alabama told Kenny that they were going to give him tickets to the Alabama-Auburn game when they were recruiting him. And then all of a sudden, the tickets didn't come. And Kenny had blocked that week. All of a sudden, and here's the other thing that happened. And I've got the proof. I'm not going to show it because I'm not going to get anybody in trouble. But when Kenny McIntosh went on an unofficial visit there going into his senior year, there was a list. His name was on it, and it was under the topic second tier. And someone that he knows took a picture of that list and showed it to him. And if you want to know why Kenny McIntosh has a chip on his shoulder, it's because Alabama said he was second tier. It was because Alabama pulled his tickets to Alabama-Auburn. Kenny McIntosh, remember the name. He's not DeAndre Swift yet, not Brian Herring yet. Okay, James Cook is a different animal, and so is Zamir White. But Kenny McIntosh is a guy that will evolve and that will star at Georgia. We saw a little bit of it against Arkansas State. Now, granted, the Sun Belt team, fourth quarter, but 62 yards is 62 yards. And that dead leg move was devastating. That was one of the best moves by a running back I've seen in a long time. Kenny is starting to feel it. He's got to grow. He's got to get bigger. Kirby wants him to do a little more on special teams. But my point, getting back to James Cook, is, who you all know is one of my favorite players to watch, because I've talked about him ad nauseum, is that you got to use Cook, right? And now that you know you've got Kenny, now that you know you're four deep in that backfield, I don't want to say that makes Cook expendable, but I just don't know how much you line him up deep in the eye and run him, or even in the single back and run him. Even when you got him back there, you're throwing to him. You're throwing a swing. Maybe every now and then he gets a run. But for the most part, I'm going to put him right out there in the slot. He then got to run 25 yards downfield and catch a ball, all right? Because I don't know where he's at as far as tracking the ball. But I'm just step back, boom, throw it. He's in the open field, one-on-one with linebacker, good luck. And if Cook gets by you and the outside perimeter receiver makes his block, and Charlie or Eli is able to hook another linebacker, we're talking 35 yards, right? Maybe he takes it to the house. It's an easy play. You don't got to be a genius to draw that one up, folks. And right now we know that they're down a little bit on personnel in the slot, right? Because Kyrus Jackson, he's going to be out another week. He's still got that club on his hand. He He's out there practicing. Kears made that start in the first game. There's another good story. A guy that had a tough freshman year, had some hamstring issues, was in the Kirby doghouse for a little while. He fought through it, started the first game of the year. He's out for another game with the club on his hand after the broken hand against Vandy. We know Bush isn't out there right now. You wonder when Bush will be back. He's dealing with that groin injury. We know that D-Rob had that slight hamstring. Kirby says he's back this week. We saw him run on the field. How back is he? I don't know. But put Cook in the slot. Get him the ball in space. We've seen him do it on the jet sweeps. So in the emergence of Kenny McIntosh, kind of frees Coley up. Okay, we got the depth. I can do even more. He can be Dr. Frankenstein with James Cook. James Cook is one of the most dynamic, explosive players I've seen in a long time. Is he Percy Harvin yet? Not quite yet. Is he Cordell Patterson speed? Better than Cordell Patterson. Maybe not top end speed, but a more skilled football player. Let's watch James Cook evolve. He's gotten bigger. He's gotten stronger. He is an X-factor player, an offensive coordinator's dream to have a weapon, and a defensive coordinator's nightmare. Where are they going to line this guy up next? My gosh, where's number 4 at? Number 4? The offensive coordinator says to the defensive coordinator, you're worried about number 4? I'm worried about number 4. You're worried about James Cook. I'm worried about Nolan Smith. You think your number 4 is a pain in the butt. Wait till you see what this guy can do on film. Look at this edge rusher, and he doesn't even start for Georgia. Not yet. He will. Nolan Smith will. 4 is a good number. If you want to bet on George, go to the casino. You want to bet on George? Take the number 4, red or black. You're a winner. The roulette players, the roulette brothers. Cook just needs to continue to get bigger and stronger to break tackles, Danny Smith says. John Benton, you missed my whole spiel on the blackout and why that should not happen for Notre Dame and save it for Georgia Tech. They're overhyping this game. Georgia by 20, Kevin Johnson says. That's right. Kevin, enjoy the hype. Go along with it. Oh, sure. Yeah, it's going to be a great game. Oh, Notre Dame. Yeah, the Ghosts, the Four Horsemen, the Gipper, Tim Brown, Rocket Ismail. Do you know Rocket Ismail never won a Heisman? Lou Holtz. Let's Ara Parsegian. Let's talk about all of them. Let's talk about how great all of them. You know what my advice is to Notre Dame fans? If you got a friend who's a Notre Dame fan, here's what you need to say. Say, listen, I'm going to give you some good advice. All right? You need to go back and watch the 2017 Notre Dame-Georgia game. Why? Because that's as close as you're going to get to beating Georgia this Saturday. Right? That's my advice for Notre Dame fans. Go back and watch the 2017 game. Enjoy it. That's as close as you're going to get to beating Georgia on Saturday. All right? Hold on to that memory. Find something else to do Saturday night if you're a Notre Dame fan. Check in. Start following their recruiting. Well, maybe not this year, maybe next year. Or hold on. Well, last year they were undefeated in the regular season. Okay, great. Keep those buzz phrases alive. You're not going to want to talk about what happens at Georgia Saturday night. I'm telling you, Georgia is loaded for bear. I saw it at practice. I've heard it in Kirby's voice, his tone, and I trust my eyes. I trust my eyes on this. I could be, I admit, there's a chance. I was wrong about Alabama-Clemson last year. Let me be on the record on that. All right? But I still say that Alabama football team I saw in the regular season is not the same one I saw against Clemson. The Georgia team I'm seeing right now, if it's the same Georgia team that I saw last week, and the Notre Dame team I'm seeing right now, if it's the same team I saw against New Mexico, I listen. I trust my eyes, and I listen. And I listened to Kirby Smart talk for more than 17 minutes yesterday. Over 2,300 words by my calculations as I copied, cut, and paste and put it in Microsoft Word. And I said 2,326 words. And Kirby Smart mentioned one Notre Dame player by name. One, Ian Book. It's the only name he mentioned. Contrast that to Brian Kelly, who is a very gifted public speaker. But I think Brian has pretty much canvassed the entire Georgia football roster. He's worried about this. He's talking about that. There's Fromm. There's this Pickens. He's mentioned George Pickens. Pickens is a freshman. The guy's played 2 games, and the Notre Dame coach is talking about him. Blaylock is on his radar. Swift, he called him Andre Swift. I think he'll probably know there's a D in front of that name by the end of Saturday night. But he's talking about these players right down the roster. He knows who all of them are. One hidden agenda for Notre Dame here. One possible win for Notre Dame. They're not going to win on the scoreboard, but they have gotten the brand out there. The Notre Dame brand is alive and well in Georgia. And that is the sneaky reason why Notre Dame played this game, because they want to recruit the state of Georgia. Okay, understand that. That's what's in it. Now, Georgia, 2014, they said, you know what? Let's add a little luster to our schedule, seeing as how we don't let our fans see us play our biggest rival at home, at least not now. Let's at least add a non-conference luster game to this. Let's throw Notre Dame on the schedule. And you know what? It worked. If I'm a player, you're a player, oh, look at this. You get to play Notre Dame. That's pretty cool. Home and home. Yeah. Awesome. That helps Georgia. Notre Dame's thinking, you know, everybody wants to play us. Where do we want to play? We want to play games where we can recruit. Georgia is a place Notre Dame can recruit. Georgia is a place everybody wants to recruit, right? Georgia, Florida, Texas, California. These are places you want to be, which is why I'm going to throw this out here. Wild tangent thought. Don't like the Oklahoma home and home. Don't like the Oklahoma home and home. You get nothing out of it. Done nothing out of it. You're not going to recruit in Oklahoma. Who cares about Oklahoma? Play Texas, right? I think Kirby wouldn't do it. Maybe him and Herman are friends or something. Don't waste your time on Oklahoma. I'm sick of Oklahoma. They shouldn't have gotten a playoff over Georgia last year. And all you had to do was look at the scoreboard after 17 minutes of their college football playoff game with Alabama. They're down 28-0. So why does Georgia want to lend their credibility to playing Oklahoma? I wouldn't have played Oklahoma. All right, you know how I feel about Oklahoma. I got to get ready to wrap this up. Are there any more questions or thoughts? Swift will blow off Kelly's toupee. Joel Moody, I don't know anything about a toupee. I don't even believe it. Eric Anderson, Florida is a fire hydrant that will water later this season. I think Florida could get beat by Tennessee. I predicted it. You know, I'll stand behind it. I'm going to stand behind this wild prediction. Wild-haired prediction there. Hair on fire. Only just feel that Tennessee shocks the Gators. I could be wrong. I could be way wrong. They could lose by 35 points. But I wouldn't be surprised if they won. I'm telling you, it's a chance. One shot at redemption, right? What if somebody told you, and you played sports, right? We all played sports. Don't we all have that loss that we're never going to get over? I bet if you sat there and thought about it for a second, you could think about the loss that you've had in athletics that you will never get over. I don't know what age it was, 5, 7, 9, 15, 18, rec ball, 28, 35, 42 in the beer league. There's that one loss that, I keep wanting to use that word, but I'm not going to, that ticks you off to this day. And then somebody came along and told you, guess what? I'm going to give you a chance to erase that memory. I'm going to give you a chance at redemption. I'm going to give you a chance to play that team again. That's what's happening for Tennessee, Florida, right? Look, you lost to Georgia State. You're a doggone embarrassment to the league. You're an embarrassment to yourself. You lost to BYU. Well, maybe now you feel a little better about it because BYU beat Southern Cal. But if you go down to Florida, and you beat the Gators, life is going to be good for you again. The sandwiches are going to be bigger in the sandwich line, right? I'm not going to use any more examples of how life could get better. But it's a chance for redemption for Tennessee. That's why I'm going with the upset. But this game here, this is not an upset. The line, a 12.5, is based on perception. The perception is Notre Dame is this and that. And the reality is that Notre Dame, if you put them in the SEC, would probably be no better than the 4th, 5th. What do you think? Missouri in the SEC? I did some power rankings. Let me go over these power rankings with you just for fun. I got Georgia number 1. I do a poll in the Super 16. It's a Football Writers poll. This week, I moved Georgia back at LSU. I had LSU ahead of Georgia last week. I was impressed with Georgia last week. Not as impressed with LSU's start. Georgia's number 1 for me in the SEC. Bama's 2. Even though I think LSU can beat them in Tuscaloosa, I'm going with Bama 2. LSU 3. Got Auburn 4. Texas A&M 5. Auburn and A&M play this weekend. Keep an eye on that game in College Station. 6, Missouri. 7, Florida. Florida 7. South Carolina 8. You got Mississippi, Kentucky playing this weekend. 9, 10. Tennessee 11. Vandy 12. Where would we put Notre Dame in the SEC? They're not better than Georgia, Alabama, or LSU. Would Notre Dame beat Auburn or Texas A&M on a neutral field? I'm going to say Notre Dame would only be the 5th or the 6th best team in the SEC in all reality. That's just the reality of it. Ro Hawkins says Notre Dame 5th in the SEC. What else we got here? KY. The line is -14. John Lee says, thanks for the update, John. It opened at 12.5. Robert Barnes says, I have to pull for the Vols. I hated that Kentucky missed that field goal. I have learned there is no team that Georgia fans hate more than the Florida Gators. It isn't even close. And I understand it. I completely understand it. The Gators have it's a pretty obnoxious fan base. Chad Daniels says Notre Dame 4th or 5th in the SEC. Danny Smith said you'd put him in front of – now, come on, Danny. You'd put him only in front of Arkansas? Come on, man. They'd beat Ole Miss, right? They'd beat Vanderbilt. Well, you know what? Actually, they only beat Vanderbilt by 6 points last year in South Bend. So maybe you're onto something there. Ro Hawkins, amen. Eric Anderson says, I think South Carolina could beat Florida. I think Eric is right about that. Let's keep an eye on South Carolina. That's a program to keep an eye on with this new young quarterback and Will Muschamp. I thought South Carolina squandered some opportunities against Alabama. I really did. I wonder if that's one of those games that Alabama won before they even showed up because of their big name. Preston Brown says Notre Dame 5th. Mark Goodman says he would pull for Florida over China. He would pull for China over Florida. Mark, you really, that's good stuff there. KT Tyson hates Bama just as much. Justin Glaze, Pickens and Blaylock combined for 1,400 yards by the end of the year. Now, that is an interesting prop bet. I am not sure that is wrong. I think if both of those young men stay healthy, I might even take the over on that. Marshall Fleming remembers the bad call that Vanderbilt had against Notre Dame last year and how close Vandy was to beating an undefeated Notre Dame team. Think about that for a moment here. Daniel Aldrich, I know who the backup is. Wondering if Fromm decides to leave, who is his replacement? I don't think his replacement's on campus right now. I think Georgia would get a transfer quarterback. That's what I think. That's probably not the politically correct thing to say, but that's what I believe. If Dwan Mathis can get healthy, he's dynamic. He's unbelievable. He's a 10-800 guy. He can throw a ball 70 yards. You got a tease of that. But until Dwan recovers from the brain surgery, look, Stetson Bennett is capable. I'm not ready to put Stetson Bennett in the Doug Flutie classification as far as 5'10" quarterbacks that can get it done. Although he did look much better against Arkansas State, so I don't want to write Stetson off yet. But I do think Georgia would get a transfer quarterback if Jake were to go pro. And I'm not sure where Jake's at on that. I don't have any reason to believe that, so don't run with it. You heard on Mike Griffith. I'm not saying anything because I don't know. Only thing I want to talk about Jake Fromm about today is keeping him healthy and how game day should do something on the fruit pizza. Those are my 2 points on Jake Fromm today. Rodney Studstill, Georgia beats Notre Dame 45-10. Dom and George can both surpass 1,000 yards each. Boy, I don't know. Georgia's leading the SEC in rushing right now. I don't know if we're going to see that trend change. Kirby loves to pound the football. Pound, pound, pound. And then when you play action, over the top. Because the safeties having to keep coming down to run support. They have to keep filling. And now all of a sudden you fake it, you pull it out. That safety's taking a step in, and that's all that Pickens or Blaylock or D-Rob needs, or maybe Matt Landers. That's all they need to get by you. That's why Kirby pounds. He understands that the best way to win a football game is by controlling the ball and controlling the clock. Now, that rule doesn't always apply. We can all think of that one exception. They got too conservative. Look, it's smart football. You don't take chances that you don't have to take. All right? You give yourself the largest margin for error that you possibly can. And with this offensive line, which I said earlier in the program, I think this is the most famous offensive line I can think of since the Redskins and the Hogs. And I don't know, y'all, you have another example that you can think of? I can't think of another college offensive line that has the celebrity of the Great Wall. And these guys have earned it. Now, they got to keep earning it because the first time they lose it, you ready for the headline? Great fall for the... No, haven't had to write it yet. But that's if they lose, that's what's just beware. When you put a team up on a pedestal, right? The whole dirty laundry thing, right? They build you up to it happens when you put a team up on a pedestal and they lose, it's a fall. I don't think Georgia's going to lose. That's the good news. I don't think they're going to lose Saturday. I think the weather's going to be great. I think you're going to enjoy being at Sanford Stadium. If you've got a ticket, it's the golden ticket. Hold on to it. Glorious night. Enjoy football. Enjoy the SEC, and enjoy DawgNation Daily tomorrow with Brandon Adams, and enjoy our coverage on DawgNation. Connor Riley and myself, we're going to Athens tonight. He's going to talk to Rodrigo Blankenship. I'm going to talk to Aziz Ajalari, and I'm going to sign out now. Everybody have a great Tuesday. Enjoy game week.